Holden Strand served his wife divorce papers inside their own home while his mother poured champagne, and the woman he intended to replace her with sat on the living room couch, like she already owned the address. Neva Strand, 36-year-old wife of Holden, and the woman who had spent 4 years quietly holding together a marriage she believed was worth saving, stood in the entryway still wearing her coat. She had come home from a meeting she could not name, carrying a folder she could not explain, and found all three of them waiting for her. Holden Strand, 39-year-old president of Strand Construction Group and the only son of a man who had built the company from a single concrete truck and a borrowed credit line, sat at the kitchen table with an expression that looked rehearsed. His mother, Margot Strand, 66-year-old widow, and the woman who had directed every important decision in the Strand household for as long as anyone could remember, stood beside him like a second spine. And Kira Aldgate, 30-year-old niece of a well-connected investor, and the woman Margot had been carefully placing near Holden for the past 5 months, sat with her legs crossed and her smile already in place. The envelope on the table had a law firm's name embossed in the corner. Holden looked at the envelope, then at Neva. "I think you already know what this is." Neva did not move from the doorway. "Tell me anyway." Margot set down her champagne flute. "We are doing what is right for this family, Neva. You have never fit this life, and everyone in our circle has always known it. Holden needs a partner who opens doors, not someone who disappears into spreadsheets and has nothing to say at dinner parties." Kira tilted her head, almost sympathetic. "There's no reason this needs to be hard." Neva looked at Holden. She waited for him to find the words on his own, without his mother handing them to him. He only said, "The company needs a different kind of stability now." That sentence landed like a door locking from the outside. Neva understood then that this was not a conversation. It was a delivery. The papers had been drafted before tonight. The decision had been made at some dinner or phone call she had not been invited to, and now she was simply the last person in the room to be told what had already been decided about her own life. What none of them knew, what Holden had never thought to ask, what Margot had never bothered to verify, what Kira's family had not uncovered in any of their research, was that Neva Strand was also Neva Pemberton, and Neva Pemberton was the sole controlling beneficiary of the Pemberton Family Trust, established by her late father, Gordon Pemberton, a civil engineer and infrastructure investor, who had spent 30 years quietly funding the kind of projects that didn't make headlines but kept cities functioning. Through that trust, Neva held controlling ownership of Crestline Advisory and Development Group, the same Crestline Advisory and Development Group that had just been awarded a $280 million federal infrastructure rehabilitation contract that Strand Construction Group desperately needed a piece of to survive the next 18 months. Holden did not know that. He picked up the envelope and held it toward her. Neva took it. She did not open it in front of them. She did not beg. She placed the envelope in her bag, looked at Kira one final time, and walked back out the door she had come through. Behind her she heard Margot say, "See, I told you she wouldn't make a scene. Stay with this story until the end." Because the woman they pushed out of that room is the same woman who holds the contract that determines whether Holden Strand has a company left to run. And if you've ever believed that the quietest person in the room is sometimes the most dangerous one, subscribe now and comment justice before we go any further. The rain that had been threatening all afternoon arrived as Neva reached her car. She sat with the door locked and called Cyrus Obi, 50-year-old attorney and the only person outside her private trust board who understood both sides of who she was. "He handed me the papers in front of his mother and the Aldgate woman," she said. Cyrus was quiet for one moment. "Tell me exactly how it happened," she told him. Her voice shook once briefly, and then it stopped. When she finished, Cyrus said, "The trust structure is clean. Everything held under Pemberton predates the marriage by 11 years. But timing matters now. If the federal signing and the divorce proceedings collide in the wrong sequence, Holden's attorneys will try to argue entanglement." "How long do we have?" "The federal notification publishes in 9 days. The formal subcontract signing is the same week." Neva looked at the lit window of her house. 3 people inside it were probably already planning their next move. "Let the divorce go through first," she said. "Let him believe he walked away clean." Neva had not come to Strand Construction because of Holden. She had come because of the workers. The first time she walked through a Strand job site, she had been observing a drainage project her father's trust was reviewing for a small investment position. Boyd McRae, 61-year-old site operations manager who had been running Strand's field crews since Holden's father was still signing the checks, had been the one to walk her through. He hadn't known who she was beyond a name on a visitor log. He had simply shown her everything: the safety protocols, the crew schedules, the places where corners were quietly being cut to make a deadline, and told her without being asked exactly what he thought was wrong and what he thought could be saved. That was the day Neva understood there were people here worth protecting. She had married Holden 8 months later, believing the man who had inherited this company was the same man who had stood outside his father's funeral and said he wanted to do right by the people who built what his father left behind. She had held on to that belief longer than was wise. Now, standing in Strand's parking lot on a grey Tuesday with her coat collar up and a clipboard that belonged to no official department, she watched Boyd cross the lot toward a crew meeting and felt the familiar weight of knowing more than she was permitted to say. He saw her and changed course. "You haven't been around this week," he said. "Not an accusation. Just an observation from a man who noticed things." "Managing some paperwork," she said. Boyd looked at her the way he sometimes did, carefully, like someone who had spent decades reading what people chose not to say. "The Aldgate people were here again yesterday. Holden gave them a full tour, not the kind you give someone you're still evaluating, the kind you give someone you're trying to impress." He lowered his voice. "Margot sent Aldgate Capital the company's internal financial summary 3 days before the meeting. I saw the email." Neva kept her face still. She thought of 43 families whose paychecks ran through Strand's payroll cycle. She thought of Rosa Amara, 58-year-old finishing crew lead who had paid her granddaughter's first semester deposit from that check and mentioned it to Neva with the quiet pride of someone who had earned every dollar. "Don't copy that email," Neva said. "Don't forward it. Just make sure it isn't deleted." Boyd studied her. "You sound like you know what's coming." "I know enough to ask you to make sure the truth stays where it is." Cullen Aldgate, 57-year-old head of Aldgate Capital, had a pattern. Cyrus had found it after pulling records from 6 regional construction companies over the past decade. A company struggled. Aldgate appeared with fast money and an easy handshake. A personal connection materialized. A niece, a daughter, always placed near leadership. Then came restructuring, equipment sold below value, contracts reassigned, crews cut, empty buildings where people used to work. Wendell Price, 43-year-old investigator who worked with Cyrus on corporate misconduct cases, had spread the documentation across the conference table in Crestline's offices, and Neva had read every page without interrupting. Crestline's offices were on the 14th floor downtown. No signage in the lobby, clean glass walls, quiet lighting, a framed blueprint from her father's first project mounted near the window. No performance of power, just the work itself. Wendell tapped the second folder. "Kira Aldgate's personal financials are leveraged significantly. The family presents as liquid, but the real assets are pledged against 3 separate loans. They need access to Strand's subcontract act as collateral to close a separate transaction they already have in motion." Neva absorbed that. They're not rescuing Holden. They need him to access something he doesn't know exists. "That is correct," Wendell said. Cyrus closed his notepad. "And the disclosure issue. If Holden approved Aldgate's access to internal financials through Margot's correspondence without disclosing the personal connection to the board, that's a governance failure independent of the divorce." She thought of her father's voice, the difference between revenge and consequence. Revenge is when you want someone to hurt. Consequence is when you stop them from hurting others. She looked at Wendell. "I want every pattern documented, clean and sourced, nothing that doesn't survive a review." "Understood. And the workers don't get caught in the middle of any of this." Both men nodded. Cyrus already knew. Wendell had seen enough of how she worked to understand what she meant. The divorce signing was held in Holden's attorney's office. Neva arrived with Cyrus. She wore a simple grey blazer. Her wedding ring was still on her finger because she had not yet decided where it belonged. Holden was already there with his attorney, a measured man named Whitfield, who kept his expression professionally neutral. Margot was seated beside Holden, which confirmed to Neva who had actually structured this entire process. And Kira sat near the window, which told Neva everything she needed to know about how certain Kira already was. One chair had been placed slightly apart from the main table. Neva sat beside Cyrus instead. Whitfield cleared his throat. "The agreement is straightforward. Mr. Strand is prepared to be fair with the personal settlement and—" "Which accounts?" Neva asked. "Joint accounts established during the marriage. And trust-held assets." Whitfield paused. Separate property under the premarital agreement, not subject to division. Then we agree, Neva said. Holden looked surprised that she hadn't fought it. He expected resistance. What he had not understood, what he had signed without reading carefully because Margot had called the Pemberton paperwork old family sentiment and told him it wasn't worth his time, was that the trust held something far beyond sentiment. He had waived any claim to it before he fully understood what he was releasing. Kira looked at Neva from across the room. It's better this way, she said quietly. Some women know when to let go of something that was never really theirs. Neva looked at her for exactly 3 seconds. Then she returned to the pages. She signed. Holden signed quickly, with the energy of a man who had been waiting a long time to close something. Margot touched his arm. Now we can move forward properly. In the corridor outside, Holden found a moment without his mother nearby. He looked almost human without her in his peripheral vision. You'll be okay, he asked. Neva studied him. There was something genuine in the question, and that made it worse, not better. I was okay before you understood me, she said. You just mistook my patience for dependence. She walked to the elevator. Behind her in the marble corridor, she heard Kira laughing softly at something. The sound carried easily, it always had. Her phone showed a message from Cyrus. Federal notification sends in 6 days, signing ceremony confirmed, you're listed as Crestline's authorized representative. The elevator doors closed. 4 days later, Holden stood in his own conference room, trying to understand why the federal contract award listed a company he had never heard of as the primary recipient. Crestline Advisory and Development Group. He spent 20 minutes on the phone with his attorney, another 15 with the Federal Contracting Office. Then Boyd appeared in his doorway without being asked and set a printed copy of the award documentation on his desk. Holden read through it. His eyes moved faster near the bottom, where the beneficial ownership disclosure appeared. He read the name once. Then again. He set the paper down very carefully, the way a person sets down something fragile when they realize they have been holding it incorrectly. This can't be accurate, he said. Boyd did not answer. He had said everything he needed to say by walking into the room. The federal signing ceremony was held in a building downtown with long windows and too many chairs. Government staff arrived first, then legal teams, then subcontractor representatives. Boyd sat at the operations witness table near the back, hands folded, his face unreadable. Holden arrived with Kira and Margot because Cullen Aldgate's team had been told to attend as potential capital partners, and Margot had insisted on being present for what she still believed would mark the beginning of something. She was wearing ivory, which was a choice she would think about later. The federal contracting officer called the room to order. She moved through the formal process. She confirmed the documentation. Then the door opened. Holden had been studying the table surface because it was easier than looking at anyone directly. When he heard the door, instinct made him turn. Neva walked in with Cyrus behind her. She wore the charcoal blazer she kept for formal presentations. Her hair was pinned. She carried a clean folder and set it on the table without announcing herself. Holden's chair shifted back half an inch. Margot's voice came fast and flat. This is not the appropriate venue for personal matters. Kira straightened in her chair. For the first time since Neva had known her, she looked genuinely uncertain. The contracting officer looked up from her papers. Miss Pemberton Strand is present as the authorized representative of Crestline Advisory and Development Group, the primary federal awardee. She said it the way she said everything, without drama, without apology, without any acknowledgement that the temperature in the room had just changed entirely. Nothing moved. Then Holden said, I don't understand. Neva looked at him from across the conference room. Before you finalize the subcontractor agreements, she said, you should know who you're working for. Margot stood. She has orchestrated this deliberately. Cyrus placed a clean stack of documents on the table. Crestline Advisory and Development Group is held through the Pemberton Family Trust, established 31 years ago by Gordon Pemberton. The trust predates Miss Pemberton Strand's marriage by 11 years. The premarital agreement signed by Holden Strand explicitly excludes trust-held assets from any marital claim. These are the verified ownership records. Neva sat in the chair reserved for Crestline's primary representative. It was at the head of the table. She opened her folder. Holden's face moved through expressions she had catalogued over 4 years: surprise, disbelief, the specific version of his anger that came from feeling outmaneuvered, and then something underneath all of that, Slower, quieter, recognition. The memories arrived the way they always did in people who had not paid close enough attention. Her asking about the cash flow projections, her noticing the subcontractor payment gaps, her telling him twice, carefully, not to rush the Aldgate financing, him waving it off, him saying, "Some of this is above your level, Neva." Every moment looked different from where he was sitting now. Kira leaned toward Cullen and spoke in a fast, low voice. Cullen's expression had traveled somewhere else. He was looking at the documents the way a man looks at a door he thought he had unlocked and has just discovered is sealed from the other side. Neva's voice was level. Crestline's award includes governance conditions for all subcontractor participation. She looked at the contracting officer, who nodded. Cyrus distributed copies around the table. First, Strand Construction Group's participation is contingent on a full board review of undisclosed conflicts of interest, specifically, the provision of internal financial data to Aldgate Capital through personal correspondence prior to any formal financing agreement. Margot's chair moved. "I was helping my son." "The correspondence is documented and is now part of the official record," Cyrus said. Second, Aldgate Capital's bridge financing proposal is rejected under federal subcontractor conflict provisions. Their involvement created an undisclosed competing interest. They are excluded from further participation. Cullen Aldgate placed his leather folder on the table with a sound that was very quiet and very final. Third, Holden Strand is suspended from executive signatory authority pending the board conflict review. Interim Operations Authority transfers to Boyd McRae, reporting to the Federal Transition Committee. Boyd lowered his head. When he raised it again, his eyes were bright at the corners. Fourth, no workers will be reduced, displaced, or removed under the first phase of the subcontract execution. Payroll continuity is a condition of Crestline's participation. This is not negotiable. From the back of the room, someone exhaled. It was a quiet sound, the kind that comes from a chest that has been tight for too long. Neva looked at Kira. Kira Aldgate's concurrent personal relationship with Holden Strand during active financing negotiations will be entered into the corporate governance record. Kira's smile, the one that had been in Neva's living room the night the papers were delivered, the one that had been present at every dinner and meeting and carefully arranged encounter over 5 months, was simply gone. What replaced it was calculation, pure and cold, which told Neva more than anything else that Kira had never been in this for Holden. She had been in it for what was adjacent to him. The contracting officer confirmed each condition. Pages were signed, countersigned, witnessed. Kira stood before it was over. She walked to where Cullen was already positioned near the exit. She passed Holden's chair without slowing. She did not touch his arm. She did not say his name. She moved through the door the same way she had moved into his life, efficiently, toward the next objective. Holden said her name once in the hallway. His voice carried through the open door. She didn't stop. Cullen's voice came back, clipped and brief. Then the sound of both of them dissolved into the elevator corridor. Margot sat at the table long after everyone else had shifted away. She was wearing ivory for a celebration that had not happened. She stared at the window. The expression on her face was one Neva had never seen on her before and suspected she would not see again. Not because Margot would recover her composure quickly, but because some understandings, once arrived, could not be unfounded. Holden found Neva near the glass wall overlooking the building's atrium. Through the window, Boyd was shaking hands with the federal team, smiling in a way Neva hadn't seen from him in months. "Was it planned from the beginning?" Holden asked. "All of it." She turned. He looked smaller than he had in years, not physically. He was still the same man, but the architecture of certainty that had always surrounded him had come down, and without it he looked exposed in a way she had only seen once before, standing outside his father's funeral in the rain. "The Crestline Award was decided on merit," she said. "My father's trust began funding infrastructure 11 years before I met you. I didn't know Strand would need this subcontract until you started hiding the financial reports under folders when I walked into your office." He was quiet. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "About the trust, about any of it?" She had held that question in her chest for a long time. She had almost told him once over dinner after his father's memorial, when he had been honest and tired and briefly the person she had chosen. She had held the words ready and then put them away. "Because you needed me to be smaller than you," she said. "Maybe not on purpose, but every time I offered more than you expected, you redirected it. So I learned what shape I was permitted to be around you. And I kept that shape because I thought losing myself was safer than losing you." Holden looked at the floor, then at the window. "I made a mistake." It was the sentence she had needed to hear for 2 years. She understood it clearly for what it was now, accurate, sincere, and years too late to change anything. She reached into her bag and took out her wedding ring. She had put it on that morning out of a habit she hadn't examined. She placed it on the window ledge between them. "I loved the man you were when you were scared and honest," she said. "I don't know the man who needed me invisible to feel secure." She picked up her folder. She left the ring where she had set it. 3 floors below and 1 block east, the Strand job site came back to life. Field crews that had been on reduced hours received the call before the ceremony paperwork was fully processed. Boyd had sent the message from inside the conference room because he had been waiting to send it for months. Payroll would be stable by Friday. The equipment repair schedule Holden had deferred twice because the numbers made him anxious was approved and funded under the federal subcontract provisions. Rosa Amara was in the crew briefing room when the confirmation came through. She pressed her hands flat on the table and breathed out slowly. Someone beside her asked if she was all right. She said she was. She said she just needed a moment. Her granddaughter was starting school in the fall. Rosa had not told anyone how close the numbers had come to not working out. She had not told anyone about the nights she sat with her calculator and the feeling of the floor going soft beneath her. She got herself together and went back to work. Neva walked out of the federal building into afternoon light that was pale and clean. She did not look back at the entrance. She did not think about what Holden was doing upstairs, or whether Margot was still sitting at that table in her ivory blouse, or where Kira and Cullen had gone to regroup. Those things were no longer hers to carry. Her phone showed a message from Boyd. "Thank you. Whatever you did up there, thank you." She typed back, "That's what the work was always for." She thought of her father walking her through his first plant, pointing to the people on the floor, not the name on the building, not the entry in the ledger, the people. "Don't fall in love with what something is called," he had told her. "Fall in love with what it does for the people inside it." She had understood that differently at 17 than she did now. At 17, she had thought it was guidance about business. Now she understood it was guidance about everything: what to protect, what to release, and how to know the difference before it costs you too much of yourself to matter. The street ahead was ordinary. People moving through a Wednesday afternoon without knowing anything about Strand construction or Crestline advisory or the morning that had just concluded on the 14th floor. Neva walked toward the parking structure. She had a call with the federal transition team at 4, a follow-up with Cyrus at 5, then nothing. A full evening, with no one else's emergency to manage, no pride to absorb on behalf of someone who never asked for her protection, no careful shape to hold herself into for the benefit of a room that never saw her clearly anyway. Just herself, the version of herself that had always existed beneath everything she had bent to accommodate. For the first time in longer than she wanted to count, that felt like exactly enough. Behind her, the building's glass face reflected the afternoon sky back at itself, indifferent and clean. She didn't look back. The light ahead was green, and she walked into it without breaking stride.